The night is still, the hum of the city distant, broken only by the occasional passing car. Colonel James Carter drives steadily down a quiet street, his hands firm on the wheel, his mind elsewhere. It's been a long day, one filled with back-to-back meetings at the military base, a final debriefing before his upcoming retirement, and a quick stop to visit an old friend. Now he's heading home, hoping for a peaceful night. His dark blue sedan glides smoothly along the road. He's still in his uniform, his neatly pressed jacket adorned with medals and ribbons that speak of decades of service. The streetlights cast soft glows on his windshield, and for a moment he allows himself to relax. Then, flashing red and blue lights appear in his rearview mirror. A sharp sigh escapes him. He tightens his grip on the steering wheel, his heart sinking with the familiar feeling of being targeted. He signals and carefully pulls to the side of the road, making sure his movements are slow and deliberate. He already knows the drill. In the rearview mirror, he watches as a white police officer steps out of the squad car. Officer Bradley Miller, mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, approaches with a sense of ownership over the situation. His face is set in a tight, no-nonsense expression, but there's something else in his eyes, a flicker of arrogance, of assumption. Carter exhales and rolls down his window, keeping both hands on the steering wheel, visible and still. Miller doesn't greet him, doesn't explain why he's been pulled over. Instead, he goes straight to demands, license and registration. His voice is cold, clipped, as if Carter is nothing more than a nuisance. Carter remains calm, his years of discipline keeping his irritation at bay. He meets Miller's gaze. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over, officer?" Miller's jaw tightens. He doesn't like being questioned. He leans in slightly, his hand resting near his holster. "You don't get to ask questions. Step out of the vehicle." Carter's muscles tense, but he doesn't let it show. He's been in situations far more dangerous than this. But this is different. This is the kind of battle he shouldn't have to fight, yet one he knows all too well. He keeps his voice steady. "Officer, I have every right to know why I'm being stopped." Miller scoffs, shaking his head as if the question itself is offensive. He takes a step back and places his hand fully on his holster. "Step out of the damn car, now!" A slow, simmering anger stirs in Carter's chest, but he tamps it down. Arguing won't help. Protesting won't help. The wrong move could turn this into something far worse. Silently, he unbuckles his seatbelt and pushes open the door. As he steps out, he straightens to his full height, taller than Miller by an inch or two. His posture is natural, authoritative. A man who has commanded troops, who has stood on battlefields, who has earned the respect of those who serve under him. But none of that matters to Miller. All he sees is a black man. "Hands on the hood," Miller orders. Carter hesitates, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "Officer, I am a United States." "Colonel, I don't give a damn if you're the president," Miller interrupts, his voice laced with mockery. "You fit the description of a suspect in this area." Carter lets out a slow breath. He could argue. He could pull rank. He could tell this man exactly who he is and demand the respect he's earned. But he knows it won't matter. Not yet. So without another word, he turns and places his hands on the hood of his car, staring straight ahead as the cold metal presses against his palms. Miller smirks. That's more like it. He roughly yanks Carter's arms behind his back, snapping handcuffs onto his wrists with unnecessary force. "Resisting, huh?" Miller sneers. "That'll be another charge." Carter says nothing, his face unreadable. A few passers-by have stopped to watch, their expressions a mix of concern and outrage. Some pull out their phones, recording the scene. One elderly black man in the crowd shakes his head. "Y'all don't even know who that is," he mutters. But soon they all will. They all. Miller tightens the handcuffs around Colonel Carter's wrists, the cold steel biting into his skin. The officer's grip is rough, his movements aggressive, as if determined to prove a point. Carter remains still, his breathing controlled, his jaw clenched but his face unreadable. He's been trained to endure much worse, to keep his composure in the face of adversity. "Let's go," Miller grunts, yanking Carter toward the squad car. The colonel stumbles slightly but corrects himself. Before Miller can shove him further, the gathered crowd murmurs, their unease growing. A young black woman, phone in hand, steps forward. "Officer, what did he do?" she demands. Miller shoots her a sharp look. "Step back, ma'am. This isn't your business." "It is when you're arresting a black man for no damn reason," she retorts. "Resisting. Arrest and failing to comply is reason enough," Miller snaps, ignoring the disapproving glares from the onlookers. Carter doesn't speak. He refuses to dignify the accusation with an argument. There's a time and place to fight back. Right now, letting this officer dig his own grave is the wiser move. Miller pushes Carter into the back of the police car, slamming the door with unnecessary force. He turns toward his partner, Officer Steve Connolly, who has been watching the whole situation unfold from the driver's seat of the squad car. Connolly, a younger officer with softer features and uncertain eyes, shifts uncomfortably in his seat. "You sure about this, Brad?" Connolly asks quietly as Miller opens the front passenger door. Miller scoffs. "Yeah, I'm sure. Another punk who thought he could talk back. He'll learn." Connolly glances in the rearview mirror, his gaze meeting Carter's for a brief moment. Something in Carter's expression gives him pause. It's not fear, not anger, just a quiet, knowing patience, as if he's waiting for something. As the car pulls away, the murmurs from the crowd turn into conversations, then into online posts. The city, whether Miller knows it or not, is already talking. The squad car pulls into the dimly lit parking lot of the precinct. Inside, the station is bustling. Officers typing reports, suspects being processed, the low murmur of police radio chatter filling the air. Miller steps out first, tugging Carter. Out with him. The colonel straightens his posture, his presence commanding even in handcuffs. He doesn't need to speak. He exudes authority. As they walk through the station, a few officers glance up. Some stop what they're doing, their eyes widening slightly as recognition sets in. Carter notices it, the double takes, the whispered conversations. "Hey, isn't that—" one officer mutters to another. "Wait, that's Colonel Carter," another voice says. Miller remains oblivious, focused only on his task. He leads Carter to the processing desk, slamming a clipboard down. "Got a perp here. For booking, resisting arrest, failure to comply." The desk sergeant, Captain Raymond Harris, an older black officer with salt and pepper hair and deep lines of experience on his face, looks up from his paperwork. The moment his eyes land on Carter, his face changes, his brows knit together and his jaw tightens. "Colonel Carter." Harris's voice is low, laced with disbelief. Miller frowns. "Yeah, whatever his name is. Got a problem?" The room falls into a tense silence. A few more officers turn, watching closely. Connolly shifts uncomfortably beside Miller, his fingers drumming against his belt. Harris pushes his chair back slowly and stands, fixing Miller with a hard stare. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Miller lets out a dry laugh. "A guy who refused to follow orders." Harris doesn't blink. "James Carter is a decorated U.S. military colonel. He's served this country for over 3 decades. He's been awarded the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star, and multiple commendations for his service. And you just put him in cuffs. For what?" Miller's smirk fades slightly, but he shakes his head. "Look, I don't care who he is. He refused to step out of the car when I told him to." Harris takes a deep breath, his patience thinning. He turns to Carter, his voice calmer. "Colonel, are you all right?" Carter, who has remained composed throughout, gives a small nod. "I've been through worse, Captain." That single statement, so effortlessly delivered, cuts through the room like a knife. The weight of Carter's words, his sheer presence, makes The situation impossible to ignore. Harris turns back to Miller. "Take those damn cuffs off, now!" Miller hesitates. His face turns red, his authority slipping. "I said now," Harris growls. With stiff movements, Miller unlocks the cuffs, his hands trembling slightly. Carter rubs his wrists, rolling his shoulders. The air in the station is thick with unspoken judgment, the weight of Miller's mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. For the first time, he feels the eyes of his fellow officers on him, not with admiration, but with scrutiny, with doubt. His career will never be the same again. Colonel Carter rubs his wrists, rolling his shoulders to shake off the discomfort of the tight handcuffs. The precinct is silent, every officer watching, waiting. The weight of what just happened hangs in the air like an approaching storm. Miller shifts uncomfortably, his confidence starting to crack. His fingers tighten around his belt, his gaze darting between Captain Harris and Colonel Carter. He opens his mouth, as if to defend himself, but before he can, Carter takes a step forward. "I've served this country for 30 years, Carter begins, his voice calm but firm. His presence alone commands the room. "I've led soldiers into war zones. I've stood on the front lines of battle, not just for my fellow soldiers, but for every American, no matter their color, no matter their background." Miller crosses his arms, trying to mask his discomfort with indifference. "That's real nice, but..." Carter cuts him off with a sharp look. "I wasn't finished." The entire room is listening now, even the officers who usually wouldn't get involved are watching Miller squirm under the weight of the truth. "I fought for the freedom you take for granted. I risked my life so men like you could wear that badge with honor," Carter continues. His voice doesn't rise, but there's a power in it that makes even the most hardened officers straighten up. "And yet, here I stand, treated like a criminal. Not because I broke any law, but because you assumed based on nothing but the color of my skin." Miller's face turns red, a mix of embarrassment and frustration. "I was just doing my job," he mutters. "Your job," Carter repeats, taking another step forward. "Your job is to serve and protect, not to harass, not to arrest a man. Because he didn't move fast enough for you." He pauses, then looks Miller dead in the eyes. "Tell me, Officer Miller, what exactly did you see when you looked at me? A threat? A thug? Certainly not a man who outranks you in more ways than one." The room is still. No one dares to break the silence. Captain Harris exhales through his nose, his eyes never leaving Miller. "Colonel," Harris says, his voice respectful, "you have every right to press charges. We can start that process right now." Carter studies Miller for a long moment. The younger officer beside him, Connolly, looks mortified, clearly realizing the gravity of what just happened. Miller, on the other hand, is still clenching his jaw, refusing to admit his mistake. Carter exhales, then shakes his head. "No," he says finally. "There are bigger battles to fight. But make no mistake, this moment will follow you, Miller. You may not answer for it today, but you will answer for it." With that, Carter turns to Harris and nods. "I'd like to leave now, Captain." Harris steps aside, making it clear that Carter is free to go. Officers watch as the colonel strides out of the station, his back straight, his dignity intact. But for Miller, it's not over, not by a long shot. The precinct is quieter now, the tension still thick. Captain Harris turns to Miller, his expression unreadable. "You really messed up, Brad," he says finally. Miller huffs. "I didn't know who he was." Harris raises an eyebrow. "And that would have changed things." Miller's mouth opens, but he realizes too late that there's no right answer. If he says yes, he admits to treating people differently based on status. If he says no, he admits to his own racism. "Doesn't matter," Harris continues. "What matters is that this is going public. The whole damn city is going to know what you did. And the department, They're not going to protect you. Connolly shifts beside him. Captain, there were people recording. This is already online. Miller's stomach sinks. He grabs his phone, unlocking it with shaking hands. The notifications are endless. Messages, missed calls. A video already making the rounds on social media. Racist cop arrests black colonel for no reason. And the comments are brutal. One sticks out. This man fought for our country. That officer can't even fight his own bias. Miller looks up, his face pale. Captain, I can fix this. Harris shakes his head. No, you can't. The door to the captain's office swings open, and two higher-ups from Internal Affairs step out. They look straight at Miller. Officer Miller, one of them says, his tone clipped and formal. You need to come with us. Miller swallows. Hard. He knows what's coming. The department is about to throw him under the bus to save itself. He'll be investigated, scrutinized, and in all likelihood, fired. As he walks away, head down, Connolly watches him go. A part of him almost feels...